Hey y'all, welcome to the Clock Tower. I'm Colton here with Brandon. This is it. This is the big Rumble video. We're talking about everything Rumble, how we did. Both of us went top 4 in different regions. We're going to talk about our decks, our runs, the whole 9 yards, and we're going to go over that big old data set that we always do. But first, we have to talk about Taiwan. Springfest Taiwan, May 20th, 29 players. They decided to play singles instead of teams. They played 5 rounds of Swiss followed by double elimination, which is a super interesting format that I honestly wouldn't mind seeing other places. First place was SDS Choice Bar, second place was Dual Laners Pachin, third place was a Fate Grand Order trial deck, and fourth place was Alice Argo from Sword Art. Very, very normal regional.
I think your definition of normal and mine are very different. Very impressed that the Fate Grand Order trial deck was able to, one, surpass Alice and Argo.
Which it had to beat in the third place game. It had to beat Alice Argo in the third place game, which is super funny. I like small events. I hope that Bushiroad continues to support some of these. I know that they didn't in Puerto Rico this year for Weiss, which is super disappointing, because I think those small events are really great. You get to see some really fun stuff like this. Like SDS Choice Bar. Good on the players who made top in this. I hope everyone had a good time. I know I would have, because this event sounds like it was really cool to be a witness to. So let's dive in to Rumble. And we'll start in AO. Looking at top 8 from AO, we see a whole lot of Alice. 6 different Alices going top 8, including 3 different top ends. The Kirito taking 3 tops. A pair of Silicas and an Argo. Second place was Stock Soul Escanor. And then Killua on Saikano, of all things, made top 8 as well. So first things first, congratulations to Rave World on the win and everybody who topped. You topped in this regional, Brandon. You finished 4th with Alice Argo. We're going to talk about your deck and your run in more detail in a second. But first, this is a lot of Alice.
Yeah, no, there was a lot of Alice. We kind of expected to see a lot of Alice, especially coming in. So I know you and I both were in agreement that Alice was kind of the deck to beat going in. But to see that many in top 8 is definitely reminiscent of a bygone era, for sure.
Yeah, I've kind of pushed back on the Alice is as problematic as Dao kind of argument, in part because I still don't think that it is. But it is definitely, in terms of representation, really pushing towards that level. And I think that there are reasons why SAO is not as oppressive as Dao, despite, I think, these numbers kind of hinting towards that. I think that there's a lot more stuff in the meta that can deal with Alice than could deal with Dao back when it was in its heyday. Like, I just don't think those two are particularly comparable. But at the same time, like, this might be a problem. I'm not willing to say that it is right now, because again, this was like the first real tournament cycle for Alice. Like, we're still early in the Alice meta. I also think that there are responses to Alice. I think there are decks that have things that can deal with Alice much better than stuff that, because nothing could deal with Dao at all back in its day. So I think like some things need to change. I think some people need to make some adjustments because of the Alice meta. But yeah, this is definitely something to keep an eye on. This is also the outlier. Alice does not do this in any other tournament, whereas Dao kind of did this in, like, it had like half of top 8 in all of the Rumbles, if I remember correctly, that year, whereas Alice doesn't. So that's definitely worth thinking about as well. AO also tends to be a little denser with high-level players. You are more likely to pair into a high-level player in AO because just it's a more talent-dense event. than NA, especially. EU probably not so much, but it's definitely more talent dense than NA. So I think more of like the high level players are also just going to be on Sword Art because it is the best deck. So as always, there are different ways to interpret this, and you have to be at least a little bit careful with interpretation. Like just going strictly off of this is representation rate, this is top rate, this is therefore a problem. It kind of glosses over some of the finer details, but based on the criteria that we've used before in talking about Dal being a problem specifically, Alice is definitely like in the conversation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like I think especially going kind of recognizing that yes, while it is reminiscent of a bygone era, that there are definitely tools and pieces to be able to play into these things. I think much more efficiently and much more spread out across different sets. That you don't have to pick a specific set to try to play into something. That you can actually play a wide variety of different things and have a lot of different outcomes as well.
Seeing all those sets coming out in the next 3 to 6 months, like back when Dal was completely dominant, there wasn't anything on the horizon that was going to.
It was surrounded by Monica releases.
It literally was. So like, Alice is definitely surrounded by better things on its release schedule. So as much as this may be like the Alice moment is not going to be permanent just because we've got a bunch of other stuff coming out. It will get banned. It's going to. That's just going to happen. We've had the argument many times over whether that's good or bad. We're not going to, rehash that here, but it's going to get hit. It's going to get hit for sure at some point. Like I don't think that they could look at this and go, this is not going to get hit. Then again, they kind of didn't hit Hololive ever, so who knows? Who knows? Anyway,
SAO number wise, the numbers almost nearly line up with some of what Dal was putting out right before it got banned. So the likelihood that we might see something like that, even just from these numbers alone, I wouldn't be surprised with that as well coming out in your near future. Like, keep in mind, Kaguya got hit after only really getting results at Rumble. So
still the dumbest ban, the absolute dumbest thing. That is somehow dumber than the Fate Climax being wrong on the restriction sheet. Anyway, moving on. We could talk about this all day. Point is, this was top 8. No real surprises other than Killua on Saikano, which I have no respect for Saikano as a set. It's terrible. So massive props to Killua for easily getting the most unlikely top out of this whole weekend. Easily. Like, Killua's a great player, obviously. Killua getting top 8 is not a surprise. Killua getting a top 8 with Saikano is a unique achievement. So props to him for pulling off something that really should not have been possible.
congratulations on making top 8.
Now we get to talk about how Brandon's a bad person. So, Brandon, you took Alice. However, you were the only Argo player.
Yes.
And we're going to talk more about like the Alice distribution and like the different top ends that people played. I was surprised to see as little Argo as I saw. I think we all kind of expected Silica was going to be the most played, just based on conversations. But I was surprised to see as few Argos as we did in relation to the Kirito specifically. I'm really surprised at how much Kirito there was.
That's fair. I expected there not to be as much Argo as there was. Actually, I expected there to be less Argo. So I was actually pleasantly surprised when going through the data seeing how many Argos there actually were. But yeah, no, and I think the Kirito actually makes a lot more sense after the fact that Kirito can definitely kind of really play into Alice pretty efficiently. And so bringing Kirito as kind of like the anti Alice deck, I think is actually a really interesting play as well. Yeah, but I did bring Argo. I saw this explosive finisher and it said, "Hey, you mean I can kill people from 2-4? Sure, why not?"
This will be a theme.
Yes, it will. And actually, fun fact, kind of going into this, I was actually originally planning on playing Slime, but because of how Chicago went, more or less rage quitting the deck, I ended up picking this up the week of and said, "Hey, Colton, I'm playing this instead."
And you were always going to play Alice. Like you didn't just like say screw it, I'm picking up Alice. Like you've had the cards for a long time. Like
Yeah,
this is your IP actually. Like you were always going to buy the Sword Art set even if it sucked. So like it's not like you just, raged into just I'm going to play the best thing. You definitely already were planning on pivoting to this after this season. The pivot just happened sooner than you expected because Slime really did not help you at all in Chicago.
if I'm going to have to fight my deck for cancels, I'm going to try to just stick as much damage as I possibly can at the top. So, ended up with the 8-choice build. This is actually basically the same list that I put out for the channel, minus the money counters. Realistically, I just didn't have access to them for this past week, so I upped some of the other ratios just to try to provide a little bit more consistency, and said, if I can close from 2-4, I'm going to try to do it. So, with that in mind, running through the round by round, I started off the night by playing into 8 Pants AOT. Alice came down 1-5, refreshing to 2-0. So even if they played Cart Titan, which they had in the deck but didn't end up playing, they only really could have removed like one Alice at a time because the anti-change effect of that would not have been effective there. I basically kept Alice on board until the end game. They only ended up getting like one lane of combo. They used up so many resources throughout that game. They just weren't able to really pull anything off, and so Alice kind of carried me into that first win.
I mean, that's what it's supposed to do, though.
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly what it's supposed to do.
Like that's literally just the plan is you bully things that are smaller, and in the instances where you're not playing something that's smaller, because you're on the Argo, you just do a bunch of damage and win the game anyway.
Going into the second round, I actually ended up playing off against another top 8 player, and so playing into the essentially Alice mirror with just different top ends. Realistically, he was able to kind of maintain board in that game, and so I was kind of like on the back pedal for a good most of the game. Argo was able to stick a lot of damage and made the game a lot closer than it should have been, but he was still able to get that game off. Just meant he canceled enough times, played into his deck. His deck did what it needed to do. He was able to kind of loop that Alice combo, and he was able to carry that into a win. So, falling down 1-1 after round 2, wasn't feeling as optimistic at top 8, but I'm like, you know what? We're just going to try to ride this out and see where we go. Going into round 3, this actually ended up being on stream, playing against the salvage choice list for Kaguya. If I recall correctly, it's getting a little fuzzy now as we get further and further away from the tournament scene, I was able to get Alice up, and my opponent could really only answer about one lane of Alice at a time. I think there was one turn where she was able to answer 2, but I essentially just kind of brought Alice back into hand, if I remember right, and was able to kind of essentially combo again. I did turn around and use Argo to close out the game. She did get the president down, which was important to be able to try to win board against Alice. But by that point, I was already going into my closing turn. If I remember right, she took a defensive turn, essentially, trying to heal down, survive a turn, and then to try to kill me on the following turn. And I took advantage of that with my explosive top end just to try to close out the game that way. So I was able to secure that victory. Moving on, I then went and played against the Slime deck. Having piloted this deck, I kind of knew the ways to try to burn the hand, especially with Slime not having a really good answer for Alice in the early game. Just to try to kind of take advantage of that, force Slime to use up more resources than it was comfortable using up. He did get to 3 first and used the book top end against me, but I was able to cancel enough damage to then turn around and close with the Argo. I think in that game I only double Argoed. most games I did not triple Argo. There was only I think one game where I actually truly tripled. Not remembering which one it was. It might have been the Kakia game actually on stream, but I can't remember that to be sure. After that, played against Pachin. Pachin is big. It's a lot bigger than Alice. So essentially, knowing that, I still got Alice off before Pachin came down, but I wasn't going to be able to survive that. So essentially, I was able to get pieces that I needed. I more or less sculpted for the end game at that point. I just kind of threw out the level zeros and level ones just to kind of push damage, just to get the TRV player within range of Argo, which is what I was able to do, and then kind of close off.
I think that's just kind of what you have to do if you don't have a direct answer for TRV.
Yeah.
Like, you just push damage, do what you can, get it in range, find a way.
So essentially, yeah, I closed. If I remember right, I closed TRV out from level 2. So they didn't get a chance to be able to actually close off with their end game. I think that was a big part of it too. Because if I remember right in that game, I think that was a game that I actually did use stock swap. I think I did stock swap and then double Argo.
Stock swap is particularly gnarly into Tokyo Revengers, especially if you can pull it off before level 3. Like, if you have access to it before level 3, it's actually, it can be pretty crippling because they've built all this clean stock over the course of the game, and then it's just gone.
Round 6, playing into another kind of mirror-esque, playing into the SAO Silica build. This game was a little bit closer. I was able to win board here, so my opponent was kind of playing into me a little bit more, using up more resources, and essentially they got to 3 first. They had Silica, but Silica wasn't enough to close me out at that point. I had just been canceling pretty early. But they pushed me into 3, and then I turned around, and I think I actually only ended up single Argoing in that game. But that was enough to be able to, because it was a single Argo and then a Musashi. But that was enough to be able to close out Silica at that point. Going into round 7 was this is actually a really close game. This was actually versus the winner of both EU and NA. We were kind of both vying for that top cut spot there. Playing into that one, he ended up winning board early, so I was kind of, again, riding behind a little bit in that game. Essentially, in that game, we both kind of just ate damage a little bit, so the game was a little bit more rushed, so I actually had a little bit more resources for the Argo because of that. And then I was able to kind of just turn around and just push that damage in and close out my opponent that way. Which unfortunately knocked him out of top 8 for AO, but was enough to secure me in. Going into Top Cut, I ended up facing off against Killua in Top Cut. He was my first round opponent. One of the downsides with Saikano is it doesn't have stock swap. So I knew that I could play into that and be able to essentially compress through stock. So I can try to help essentially kind of combat his eventual memory compression through my own kind of compression through stock.
Yeah. And realistically, like, that's exactly what's supposed to happen in that matchup. Saikano lacks modern tools, which is why, like, I'm just so impressed by Kilo's ability to actually, like, pilot the thing into top 8. Like,
Well, it had some tools to be able to help deal with Alice a little bit. Like they had the level 2 killers that get additional power because of things in memory, right? But one of the things that really helped with that game as well, especially the early game, I intentionally level locked Killua out of 1, so he couldn't get his combo off first. That he was gonna have to force him to play into Alice. By doing that, to help him keep playables, he ended up having to encore one of his level zeros to try to make sure he could keep that damage push early. And by doing that, he also didn't have memory condition at that point. So going into that first turn of Alice, he actually didn't have the memory condition for the level 2 killer.
well, it isn't helping that you're, sniping all of his memory things by negging 1,000 power.
Yeah.
every time you drop the Alice Brainstormer. Like, that's definitely not helping him at that point. Like, it's a terrible matchup for Saikano. It's an awful matchup.
So because of that, I was able to kind of essentially stunt his memory gain early, and at that point, he still needs to get a significant number of cards in memory just for some of his abilities for his top end. So essentially, I was just trying to then at that point turn around, starve him for resources. I also lucked into essentially doing Alice 3 turns in a row with combo. Like I had an extra climax in hand for the second time around, but then the third climax, I just drew into it, and so I was able to kind of just turn around and then essentially put 12 additional clean stock into my stock. The stock crunch on his end ended up forcing him so he couldn't heal down as effectively as he wanted to, because he was like a turn away from being able to just like heal back down to 3-0 and kind of be able to kind of almost loop that cycle a little bit. But kind of knowing that, he manages to push me into level 3, and then when I hit 3, I just kind of turn around and go just to finish off the game that way, and Argo takes that victory there. Going into the second round of Top Cut, I play into the Kirito matchup. I, again, don't win board in this matchup either. In this one, he's canceling pretty efficiently and effectively, so like he is actually like low 2 when he pushes me into 3. He was like 2-2, 2-3. And so he was just a little bit outside of the range that I was hoping for. I was pretty decompressed. I didn't have the resources that I would normally have liked to have. And so I, in that game, 1 card short of triple Argo. And I knew that there was a choice trigger still in my deck to be able to potentially get that, to be able to get the triple Argo. So I'm like, okay, he's further away than I would prefer, but it's kind of go time, so we're just going to go with it and go. He ends up surviving at 3-5 with me milling out the choice trigger on the Musashi as opposed to triggering it. I was unable to get that triple Argo to get that additional instance of damage to try to continually finish off that game. So I push him to 3-5, but that's not enough to close, and then he turns around and then Kirito combos against me, which is enough to close me out at that point. So I fall down into the lower bracket of top 4 and again face off against Silica. My deck implodes in this game. I don't even get Alice combo off once. Half of the game, I only have 2 cards I can actually swing with because, like, just everything's gone wrong in this game. Somehow, I think I pushed him to, like, 3-2. Could not do anything in that game. So he takes that one pretty easily, keeping me in 4th. Ended up 4th overall in AO.
Moving on into EU, there are 3 Sword Arts in top 8, but a much more diverse top 8. Danmachi, 8 Standby Quince, Pants Salvage Kaguya, one of the Pachin lists from Tokyo Revengers, and not Escanor from SDS, but rather the Hendrickson top end. Still playing the Stock Soul mid-game package, but into the Hendrickson top end. A much more diverse top 8 here in EU. But in any case, anything that stands out to you from this? I don't think there's anything that's like shocking here, other than maybe the Hendrickson list. Kaguya maybe being a surprise.
Most of these decks are decks that have already topped in some way. I think it's interesting seeing choice with the Pants for Pachin. We don't typically see a lot of choice triggers with that. We typically see more of that salvage split soul. So that's a little interesting to see. But basically everything else is kind of things that we have expected to see or have seen in top 8 for this season already. So yeah, outside of the Hendrickson.
And we'll get more into the Hendrickson stuff specifically in a bit. But that's EU. Neither of us played in EU because it started at 4 a.m. our time. So moving back into a tournament we played in, NA. 2 Sword Arts in top 8. Kanata Marin in 2nd. 8 Standby Quince in 3rd. Oh, hey, look, it's Dragon Maid in 4th. Hendrickson again. YB again. Same player. ends up in top 8 with the Hendrickson in NA. 8 standby Quince, 8 standby MTI as well.
Yeah, so 2 repeat players, both Lamb, who won the tournament, who is also the winner of EU, and then YB, who was also the SDS player from EU as well. So 2 players, 2 top 8s back to back. Very impressive. Congratulations to those players for making those both of those runs. That it is a really good showing across all those times, especially with the number of games that you had to play to make those things happen.
The list of people who you could expect to pull off something like that, going back to back top 8 at 2 different events in Rumble, the list of people who could reasonably pull off something like that is really short. Lamb and YB are both on that list. If you had told me beforehand that one of these 2 players was going to do exactly this, I'd be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Both excellent players, obviously. Lamb has, I think he finished second at Worlds a couple years back.
Mm-hmm.
YB's been around for a long time, has topped a bunch of events, has done well in Rumble before. So no surprises here. Both excellent players. Tip the hat to both of them. They did a great job. But yeah, the first Hololive that we see, we hadn't seen any Hololive until NA. Only the second standby Quince that we've seen as well. So second and third standby Quince lists in top 8, because we'd only seen one in EU before this. The smallest Alice representation in NA, only 2 of the 8, an even more diverse top 8. I don't think, again, there's anything too shocking here in top 8. I'm not super surprised to see any of this, especially seeing the names that are here, like Kisa and Hatsu. Like, there are some very good players with long histories of being good at this game in top 8. So,
well, there is this Dragon Maid list that made top 4.
Some of us are not shocked by Dragon Maid getting top 8 in a major, but I guess we have to talk about how exactly this happened. So, hi, it's me. You may be wondering how I ended up in this situation. I've been playing Dragon Maid since it dropped. I was always going to play it, even if it sucked, because it's my favorite show, and I've been wanting this IP for a long time, so I was always going to play it. I have all the decks sleeved up, the whole 9 yards. In so doing, I started to notice that, especially, making the hour-and-a-half long how to play every deck in Dragon Maid video, that Dragon Maid actually has, like, some really good cards in it. Like, really good cards. And eventually the 8-bar list came together, and it really, really works. So if you're going to build Dragon Maid, right, you have to start with, there are a couple of decisions you have to make kind of off the bat. One is obviously your combos. What are you going to do at level 1 and level 3? For me, it was always the bar. That was always the best one, especially going into an Alice meta. On reverse combos just don't feel good at all right now, especially ones that don't assign the reverse to something, or like, the salvage off the reverse to a specific lane. So the trial deck choice combo was just never going to work into this meta. The bar is really good because you can just top check 3 and add anything. So you can add CXs, you can add events, whatever. And you also don't have to show it to your opponent. So that was always going to be my choice. At the top, there are 2 realistic combos you can use. There's the choice with the selective burn, like choose a number selective burn. And then, of course, there's the Ilu that has the on attack top check if it's a character burn 1, and the cancel burn equal to its soul. It has the 3 soul base, so it's, swinging for big numbers. It has enough precision with soul manipulation and the top check stuff you have in the set so that I was willing to give up the perfect precision of the Toru for the higher damage ceiling of the Ilu, because there is still enough precision there. You can still side for specific numbers, and you have cancel burns, for specific numbers. So that worked really well for me. So once you have your package set, the other decision you have to make is, which healer am I going to run? Because there are only 2 that you can realistically play at level 2. One is in blue, and blue is an awful color in this set. there are like two sort of playable blue cards at 0 and 1. One is a really unimpressive, like fake Ricky when it gets reversed, top check 2 at a level 1 or lower. So, like, that's super easy to whiff. It's technically a +1 if it works, but it's also really easy to whiff and also easy to just get rid of. It's not that good of a card. And then you also have, like, the 1/1 Adachi, which is just an Adachi, and that's all it does. So those are your only, like, viable blue cards other than the healer itself. And I don't think that we talk about this enough, either maybe on this channel or just in general as Weiss players, but there is more to the cost of running a card than the cost of the effect on the piece of paper, right? Like, you're not just playing a thing that says pay to heal. You're playing a thing that requires you to build a deck in a certain direction and accommodate that card in the list. And for me, the cost of having to play all these not very good blue cards in this deck was just way too much to try to jam in this blue healer. Your other option is the Resonator. So it's in yellow. It's an early play, comes down 4 or more. If you resonate the Kobayashi Brainstormer, when you play it, you can either burn 1 or heal 1. And honestly, it's the same thing with that one. It's not worth it to have to clutch an extra card in your hand to then be able to play this early play that only either heals 1 or burns 1. So, like, the cost to do the effect is too much, but then also the Brainstormer itself just isn't a good card, I don't think. It has an effect that gives power if you run a card that no one runs, because it's not a good card. It's a regular old salvage Brainstormer, but also you can rest it if you have a full board to draw 1, ditch 1. It doesn't work well at all. You could technically, like, top check and try to fix into your climax on the top of the deck, but that's a whole thing, and there are better ways to do that. So for me, I basically chose the third path, which is to just not play a healer at all. And honestly, that breaks open the entire deck. It makes the whole deck work so much better. It's not worth it to try to force a deck to play something or to play a certain way because you think it's good Weiss, when the deck is just not going to do that thing. Dragon Maid leans into a couple of very specific things, and it does not support its healers at all. There's no point in trying to jam in the healers, because the set doesn't support them in any meaningful way. So I didn't. I play no healers in this deck, which I know feels really weird to a lot of people, but it's what made the deck actually work for me. And because I didn't have to play the Resonator and I didn't have to play the Brainstormer that resonates with it, I could play the Kana Brainstorm, which top checks on play and either leaves it on top or mills. So I get a 5-card Brainstormer on play. I also get an additional just top check whenever I play it, which is really nice for the Ilalu. There's another top checker, but like if you don't get the top check to rearrange, you can just play this and get a top check for free. Also, again, leaning into what the deck does well, running 8 bar triggers means that I can play 4 copies of the CX Ditch. Because I'm going to be swimming in bar, right? I'm going to be swimming in bar triggers. So I can just slam the CX ditch one of those bars that I triggered last turn, because I'm going to trigger them all day, and get whatever I want. It's perfect fixing. Every time I trigger a bar, the next turn, that bar becomes something else. And because the CX Ditch jumps back into my hand, whenever I slam a CX, it makes the level 1 combo the most loopable combo I've ever played in my life. You set down the whole level 1 combo, you put the Kanan in the back, and the CX Ditch in the back. You slam the combo, CX Ditch comes back, you combo, next turn, you use the Kanan to save one of your level 1s, you drop the CX Ditch, you drop the bar that you either triggered or added off the combo, get the combo back, slam that, slam your other CX, just keep going, keep doing that. And that is how you beat 1k1 decks with this. Playing into things like Danmachi or SDS or other things that don't have like big boards in the mid game feels awesome, because this gameplay loop just works the whole game. You're swinging at 7-5, 7-6-5, like in all 3 lanes over the course of the game because you just keep adding power from the back row. And you just don't lose board against anybody's level 1 combo. Then, because you're playing all this stuff that has perfect fixing and this combo that can get you anything you want, when you do play into the Alices and the Kanatas and the Soras, you have access to all these tech pieces. The 1/1 that comes down for free and swings at 8/5 on the turn you play it, that just gets rid of the 1/1 blue in Quints. The level 2 killer, the Ilalu that comes down at 10, you pump it up to 11/5 at the back row, and it's just over Alice and can't be backed up. And then you canon it back to the board and kill Alice again the next turn if they manage to get another Alice down, right? And this isn't even hard. Like, you have such perfect fixing, you can go get these cards basically any time. The 2/1 Elma that memory kicks. I have double memory kicked Kanata multiple times. It's not even that hard. Sora, I can blink Sora, play over the blinker with the CX ditch the CX, go get the blinker back, and I've blinked 2 Soras, and now Sora doesn't do anything. And the 2/1 immediately just gets rid of Sora because Sora lost all the power because of the blink. Like, it's just so much tech. Like, you can get around Nexol, you can get around big boards, you can get around basically anything other than Tokyo Revengers. We'll talk about that. And you just have all this access to all this tech and cards that just work. It's just 50 good cards with extremely good fixing. And that's the whole deck. And because you're playing like the drop searcher that pluses 1 soul to the middle lane, and you're slamming combo over and over and over again, you're just pushing a ton of damage all game long. So you have this like damage rush thing going on with perfect tech to deal with just about any matchup. The CX search event. The number of times when I had like 2 climaxes in 12 cards or whatever, and I just searched out one of them to either use for my combo or to then ditch off the CX ditch to go get another lane of combo and then slam the other CX I already had, and then go through the rest of the deck and not trigger a bar so that I had clean stock, a refreshed 8 climaxes. I do that all the time. It's such a good play. Like, if you have that card, if you pick up that card in the middle of the game, like off your level 1 combo, you could just hold it. And you always have access to a CX whenever you need it. If you need to combo, if you need a CX to ditch for something, like, you just always have access. It's great. It's basically running a 9th climax. It's such a good little piece. And it really just it puts the deck just that little extra bit over the top. All these pieces do. Like, you see all the one-ofs in this. Like, you know, there's just so much tech. And you can get around specific matchups. And because the fixing is nigh perfect, you just get the cards you need. The stock swap salvages when you use it. It's a 3/2 stock swap, which doesn't always feel great because it's super late, but it also just salvages. So, like, you could play the stock swap, take your opponent's deck down to, you know, just a handful of cards, and go get your Icy Tail, which not only draws 2 for me, draw 2, ditch 1, so that I get into more cards, potentially into a climax or whatever. I also just get to Icy Tail the rest of my opponent's deck away so that after I've stock swapped, they just don't have any climaxes in their deck. So just a lot of really nice plays you can make because the cards work really well together. But anyway, like, that's a lot on that, so we're going to move into the actual rounds. Round 1, I played into Quints. It was bar standby Quints. And that, honestly, as much as I do think that this deck is pretty cool, that works really well for me because I don't have to think at all about trying to win board. I can just combo over and over again, and that's essentially what I did. Just played that mid-game loop, pushed damage, got whatever cards I needed. He actually, like, stuck 6 off the top after refresh, I think, something like that, and actually put me to 3/6, but then I canceled on lethal, and then turned around and won the game next turn because that's just what Ilalu does. So, touch and go in round 1. It was definitely close, but just that gameplay loop, and then Ilalu just closes. If my opponent was at 3-0, I think there was one time the whole weekend where I didn't close from 3-0, and it was actually in round 2 against Avis. I got to play Avis from Weiss Tea Time, which is always a pleasure. She's actually on a deck I like a lot, which is the Kanan Kasumi Bang Dream, the choice level 1 that whenever you combo, it just can't get reversed the next turn. So you're just slamming the choice over and over again and never getting reversed. So you just keep board, keep plussing 3 on board the whole game. And the Kasumi top end, it burns on attack, but also has a Negsoul event that you could play on it for free, and an anti-auto damage effect after you combo. So, Brayden, the third member of our Chicago team, actually plays this deck a lot, so I knew how to play into it because of that. But I think it's a really good deck. I think that this is actually a super underrated deck and pretty relevant right now. This specific Bang Dream. She canceled at 0 a lot, which meant that I just got to kind of go to 1 unimpeded, and I comboed and stuck 7 or 8 the next turn, pushed her into 2. So I was winning the damage race by a lot, but then I didn't play around the stock swap as effectively as I should have. So she was able to hit me with Buns for Luck and opened up my deck a bit, and it allowed her to push more damage. So we were actually pretty level in the damage race. She was at 3-0 when she comboed and swung into me and pushed me into 3-3. So I had to swing back into the Negsoul anti-auto board, and I have the tech to deal with it. I have the thing that lets me side for free so that I can play around the Negsoul event. And I also have, obviously, the blinker that just takes off the anti-auto for the combo. She comboed in 2 lanes, so I was able to blink one of them, and I was able to give a free side attack to my Icy Tail. And Ilalu swings it for 4 souls, so if she plays the next soul event, that doesn't affect me too much because I'm still swinging for 1 with cancel burn 1, and she only had access to 1 because the other 3 were in waiting room. So I think I played it really well. She canceled very effectively. She just canceled super well. Nothing you can really do about that. So I thought I was gonna die because she was at 3-5 and I was at 3-3. She couldn't do enough damage on the backswing to close. She should have had 2 Kasumis on board because I sided into 2 of the Kasumis, but she removed them from board as though I had reversed them. Neither of us noticed until after the game. It didn't end up mattering because I had 2 cancels on the top 4 cards, and she didn't have a CX. She didn't have another combo. It wouldn't have made a difference because I had the cancels. She swung, I canceled enough, and turned around, and I didn't have to do very much damage, so I was able to win the game. Super fun deck, though. I do really like that Bang Dream list. I think it's pretty underrated. Round 3, I got to play into somebody else from Michigan, which I didn't know there was more of a Weiss scene in Michigan, but I got to play into Flight of Sanjin on 8-bar Mito from Sword Art. He ended up finishing 9th, actually. He was bubbled out of Top Cut. I lost this game. It was the only game I lost in Swiss. Mostly, I think, because of a mistake I made in which I was at, I think, 2-0. He was middle of 2. We were just trading damage back and forth. And then he stuck a pair of 3s at me, so I went to 2-6. And I think I panicked a little bit and was like, I'm gonna die. So, but I also didn't think that I was gonna be able to close him necessarily from level 2 with my combo. I was planning on having one more turn. I had the cancels in deck to not eat 6, and I just ate the 6 anyway. I think that I kind of made a bit of a panicked play to try to trim the damage deficit and hope that I would have enough cancels to cancel out the Mito. And you never have enough cancels to cancel out the Mito. That was a foolish play on my part. I pushed him into 3, and he was able to close because Mito just does way, way too much damage. Too many instances to cancel all of it. So that was round 3. I was 2-1 at that point, and then I played into Escanor in round 4, and honestly, this is just a really good matchup for Dragon Maid because it just bullies the board at 1. I can just play my level 1 game over and over again and keep pushing damage. And that's ultimately like the difference, is that SDS has to kind of keep drawing into stock souls and things like that to keep pushing damage. Whereas I keep triggering bars and adding bars and slamming bars, and I have the drop searcher that I might just leave in the back row just to push that extra damage. So it's functionally like playing into a 1k1. So I actually pushed him into 3. I was at 2-2 just because I'm winning the damage race because I'm doing more damage per turn. And he tried to heal down to 3 because he didn't have enough for the Escanor. And that's the other thing, is if you rush Escanor needs to have like 5 very specific cards in hand to go off. So if you rush Escanor and deny it that extra turn or whatever that it needs to get its stuff together, you can just beat it. And so he healed down to 3, swung a few times. He pushed me like 2-6 or something. I went into 3 and then comboed off with Ilalu and won the game. 2-1-2 Dead actually finished second in AO with this list. So like it's a good list. He's a good player. I do think that Dragon Maid has the advantage into SDS. I think that's a good matchup for Dragon Maid specifically. Round 5, I actually played against Killua as well, but he had abandoned Saikano for NA and was playing Slime. Unfortunately for him, I've played into Slime with Dragon Maid roughly 9,000 times. So I've played that matchup a bunch, and I know that the secret to beating Slime is to just push as much damage as possible in deck 1 and try to push it into 2 before refresh so that like the memory compression doesn't make it impossible to stick damage the rest of the game. I actually sacked a swing for 4 to push him into 2. I think he was like 3 out of 8, and I just stuck the 4. Right. And that's the thing with Slime, is that Slime will just eat one bad swing and it starts to unravel from there because the compression is gone. So that's the game plan going into Slime for me, is just push that damage, slam characters down, slam CX, push as much damage as I possibly can, and try to push it into 2 as quickly as possible before it hits its refresh. And that's what I did, and it worked. I've played into your Slime enough to know that sometimes Slime just eats bad swings. That's one of the advantages that Dragon Maid has, is that it can just push damage from kind of the word go, just at will. So if you just need to stick a bunch of damage in the beginning of the game to, pick up an advantage, either through decompressing your opponent or just getting the damage lead, you can do that. So it worked out well. Round 6, I played in the Danmachi, which, again, I think is a really good matchup for Dragon Maid. I think they're basically like the same deck, just Dragon Maid's better. Functionally, like, loopable level 1 combo, check. Lots of selective pieces, check. Lots of good mill stuff, check. Really good closing top end. Only Dragon Maid has that. I'm not scared of the Hestia at all. Basically, like, we traded top ends. Like, he tried to close with Hestia when I was in the middle of level 2, and just Hestia doesn't do enough damage, frankly. So he pushed me into 3, and then I was able to turn around and close with the Ilalu. Again, another deck, like, just like Escanor, it's a good matchup for Dragon Maid because it can just dominate the mid game, push the damage, get the damage lead. Round 7, I played into Pachin, which is easily my worst matchup. I drew into this and I was like, dang it, I'm not going top 8 today. But there is a surefire way to beat Tokyo Revengers, and that is by sacking. I swung with as much damage as I could from the word go. I was finding very creative ways to plus, because when you swing into Pachin over and over again, there's no such thing as plussing. So I actually used my free side on a coin flip once. I shuffled back 2 triggers and swung with the coin flip. I got the free side off for the coin flip so that, like, coming back the other way, I would potentially plus the coin flip back to my hand. He actually sided the coin flip to try to deny the coin flip, which is fine with me because I was just trying to have something to push on board. In any case, I was like losing cards left and right because that's what happens into Tokyo Revengers, because you can just never beat board. Even my good board winning pieces, like board clearing pieces, just do nothing because I can't touch 16-5. Kind of nobody can touch 16-5. So I just kept pushing as much as I possibly could, slamming climaxes, the whole 9 yards. And I got the damage lead. I pushed him into 3. I'm like on like 2 cards in hand at this point, but he's at 3-0. I'm at 2-2. and he tried to Mikey, and it wasn't enough. He pushed me to like 3-3. I canceled enough of it. So I lived through the Mikey, and then I stock swapped him. He had shoved 5 clean cards to the bottom of his deck because of the Mikey, so the top 4 cards had his 3 climaxes in them. So I shoved away all 3 of the climaxes left in his deck and won the game. So I actually icy tailed him like an idiot. It didn't matter because like I had more than enough damage to push at that point, but yeah, so I was able to push the last bit of damage and get the win that way. That's really the plan into Tokyo Revengers for, I think, basically anything, honestly, that doesn't have like an early access to stock swap, is push damage and compress as much as you can and try not to die. So that's what I did, and it worked. And we made top 8, 6-1 in Swiss. It was pretty great. I felt really good about how I was playing and really great about the deck. In top 8, I paired in Hadsu, which is funny because he was my round 1 opponent in AO, and he beat me with the 8 standby MTI deck. This time I got the win. I don't remember a ton about this matchup specifically, but I do know that Dragon Maid plays pretty well into MTI on the whole, just because like I have things that get over the 1/1s, right? I think things that get over the 2/2s. I have, memory kick. So if you memory kick one of the 2/2s, everything else loses power. So like you have ways to deal with MTI. Like the MTI board is not really a huge problem in Dragon Maid, especially if you can get like a combo off. The level 1 board after combo is sitting at like 8-5, which is actually pretty scalable with Dragon Maid. Like Dragon Maid 6 sits 6-5 with combo already, and you have the back row stuff that gives power. Like you can literally play like the blinker that gives plus 2k. Like there's so much power that you can just hand out to stuff in Dragon Maid. So like getting over that initial 1/1 board's not that big of a deal. And the more you just do that, like if you could just get over standby stuff, like I think that's one of the things that is important about playing into standby stuff, like Quince as well, is if you could just get over it, even if they have things with hand on core or whatever, you force them to use those resources. And every resource they have to use in the mid game to keep their board is a card they can't use to kill you at level 3. So that was really the game plan into MTI, and at the end of the day, like Ilulu just does damage. So Ilulu wins games. Top 4, I played into Hikawa on Kanata Marin. This was really the only game where the deck like really didn't function. I got none of my level 1 combo pieces, like just got nothing. Drew none of my CX ditches, like drew nothing to help me get my combo. So I never got a level 1 combo. I think I might have gotten like 1 lane late in the game, but like I didn't combo consistently at all. So I actually fell behind pretty quickly. I was running out of cards. I ultimately was able to fix for a pair of the 2/1 memory kickers and actually memory kicked both of his Kanatas after his combo because I knew he had fixed for like getting them back necessarily because I knew what he got off the combo. That's one of the advantages of playing into Kanata is you like know exactly what's in your opponent's hand kind of at all times after the combo. So I knew he probably didn't have the stuff to actually deal with losing both of his Kanatas. So I was able to clear the board, which was really nice, and get the Kanatas off the board. But ultimately, it wasn't enough. He swung back with enough damage, and I just ate a bunch of damage at the end of the game. So, and I didn't have the stock to use the Ilulu because again, like I just never comboed over the course of the game. So that was the first game, really, the whole day where this NA specifically where the deck just didn't work at all. And that happens sometimes. Like that's an 8 out of 50 variance problem that every deck suffers from. So it's gonna happen sometimes. Shame that happened in top 4, but like at that point we had gotten to top 4 with a deck that a lot of people thought was kind of dead on arrival. So I felt pretty happy about that. And then finally in the third place game, I played into Kisa on Quince, and I was out 6 climaxes in like the first 20 cards, ate a bunch of damage. Finally did stabilize at 2. I think I was at 2-1. He was at like 2-3 or something like that. I crashed a Rize. I was 2 climaxes out of like 11 cards. I crashed a Rize to try to fix my hand a little bit, and I Rized away both of my climaxes, 8-7, and just kind of died the next turn. So that hurt. Rezaing away both my climaxes really hurt, especially after I had like kind of brought the game back after just eating a bunch of damage and like getting sent to 2 early. I think I this was a game where I got sent to 2 before refresh, which always feels really bad because in 8-bar, like you can compress pretty well. Like if you can refresh like 8 out of 28 or 7 out of 25 or something, then you want to. So having a bad refresh does feel really bad. You can get out of it because you have a bunch of mill stuff. Like the combo literally mills you 12 cards. So you can definitely get out of bad deck states with the Dragon Maid stuff, but it still doesn't feel great to get stuck in a bad deck state, and that's what happened here. And then by the time I got out of it, I immediately put myself back into it. But it was what it was. At that point, like, we were top 4. We had played really well over the course of the weekend. I went 3-3 with the deck in AO. So like over the course of the weekend to go 10-6 and get a top 4 with Dragon Maid was really good. I didn't play into any Alice's in NA, which is a little disappointing, honestly, because I've played that matchup a lot, in preparation specifically, and like I feel like I have a good game plan into Alice. I did play into Alice in AO, and I won the only Alice I faced in AO. I think that that's a compelling game, certainly, and I think it offers a unique challenge to both the Alice player and the Dragon Maid player. But I do think Dragon Maid can respond to Alice better than a lot of other things. In any case, I was extremely happy with how the deck performed over the weekend. I played some of the best Weiss I've ever played in my life. I'm going to take this again to New Jersey. By the time this video comes up, New Jersey will be over. But this is the deck I took to Chicago. It's the deck I'm taking to Jersey. Will I use it in the fall? I don't know. Like, we haven't gotten to that point yet where we're testing into stuff for the fall, but I was super happy with how I played and how the deck performed. It's my best finish at a singles event. It probably doesn't help that I keep bringing stuff like Dragon Maid as opposed to, like the actual meta, but I had a good time. I really, really enjoy this deck, and getting 4th in a major event is a pretty good feeling. All right, so let's get into some of this data stuff because we've already been recording for a very long time.
Let's do it.
The way we have it up on the screen, mostly broken down just by deck. We've also like combined some of the archetypes, like we're showing on the screen right now all of the Alices together, all the Alice into X top end, but also breaking them down individually. The Escanors, there are multiple different ways to technically build Escanor, but they all kind of functionally do the same thing. So we put them all together on this slide, but they are separated in the datasheet. Starting with Alice, because Alice was obviously the most dominant thing. By my count, there are 49 Alices. And out of those Alices, 40%, more than 40% of the builds that ran Alice went X2. So yeah, Alice, obviously extremely impressive. I am curious. Like, we're still, like we talked about earlier, we're early enough in the Alice meta that, like, I think there's still, like, ways to play into it that haven't been fully explored. I think there are some folks, especially looking at 8 standby, Quince specifically, who maybe just, like, weren't ready for the matchup or thought they were ready for the matchup and definitely weren't. I think that happened to a certain extent. So I think that these numbers will, like, go down even, like, as Springfest wraps up, just because I think people will get better at playing into Alice. But all that aside, oh my goodness, Alice is absolutely crushing it right now.
Well, and I think the big factor with that was the Alice matchup into the 8 standby Quince matchup.
Yeah.
Alice into 8 standby Quince was pretty lopsided.
Alice bullied 8 standby. Like, it wasn't close. Ironically, Argo went 1-6 into 8 standby.
Mm-hmm.
Kirito, however, went 6-1. Silica went 19-6. Like, that is lopsided. Like, you put all that together, that means that Alice beat 8 standby 2 games out of 3, which is just an incredible win rate into an individual matchup against what is considered by most people to be one of its top competitors in this meta. And it just bodied it. Looking at this, I don't think there was anything that like really stands out as like a losing matchup for Alice off rip. It did well into Hololive, kind of Tamarian. It did well into that. It did kind of split more or less with Escanor. Pretty close to a 50-50 split with Escanor, but it did well into Pachin. Like it went like 2 out of 3 almost into Pachin, it looks like. So like I don't think that there's like a matchup where like Alice's kryptonite hasn't really been like solved at a meta wide level yet. Like I said, like I think there are things that will play better into Alice, and I think people are going to explore that space more. But I do think that there are things that people can do in the decks that they're already playing to better respond to Alice. And I could be completely wrong about that.
I also think like from what I see as well here, the 8 salvage Quince
Mm-hmm.
build played a lot better into Alice than the 8 standby. With the 8 salvage deck being upgraded as the movie set comes out, that I think that also plays into a factor here
Well,
too.
I think that a lot of that has to do with the Adachi, honestly. Like, I think that the 8 salvage player is willing to say, yeah, I'm just going to Adachi this. I'm going to use the stock, like, that's fine. I'm just going to memory Adachi 2 of your Alice's and, like, call that good just so you can't keep looping this Alice on me over and over again. And we see that card a lot. I think people lean more into that in the salvage build right now than they do the standby build, because in standby they're usually trying to standby out something else, whereas in the salvage build like you're not running standby. So if you can, especially if you can combo first in the salvage build, then you just on your follow up turn essentially, like after Alice combos, you just slam a pair of those and just send them away, and hopefully that's enough to like mitigate Alice's advantage. I think we see a little bit more of that like tack into in the 8 salvage build. So maybe that's something that could be something of a long-term solution, because that memory adachi is really powerful. Like it's a really really good card. I think that that is probably like the best answer to Alice that Quince has, and it's a solid answer. It's a very solid answer because it does just permanently remove Alice from the game at level 1. So, like your mileage may vary. Like it is an investment, and you're leaving open lanes in the whole 9 yards. But like if you could just get rid of an Alice, it's probably worth it. So moving on from Alice, and maybe not moving all the way on from Quince just yet. It really did just kind of get bodied by Sao. Like that's probably a significant chunk of the reason why it did so poorly, is because Sword Art really did just kind of body it. So if Quince can solve its Sword Art problem, it will remain relevant. If it can't, it probably won't. That's probably just what it boils down to.
Realistically, also Quince is just what 2 weeks out from getting more support, if that.
Quince is changing very soon, so like it's not probably useful to just like stare down this 8 standby list and go, "What's your problem?"
Mm-hmm.
When
When all of a sudden it gets a full new set that also can
exactly,
help it pump it up, yeah.
yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So
But at the same time, seeing that 8 Standby Quince did have this kind of results from this past weekend, that it definitely warrants a needed change when that movie set does come out.
you know what did pretty well into Alice actually, now that I'm looking at it more closely, is MTI 8 standby.
Yeah, Hadsu played really well into it.
And okay, like we'll put a pin in that. We're gonna put a pin in that because that's something that we're definitely gonna want to talk about, is like these decks that did well because a player did well. So we're gonna put a pin in that. Moving on down the list of like decks by relevance, right? Kanata Marine did fine. Did did fine. It had 3x2s, one top 8, 12 players. Like its conversion rate was fine. Its win rate was fine, 48% total, which is like obviously lower than you probably want it to be, but it did well into Argo, like we talked about. It did very poorly into the rest of SAO. Like, on Hololive, again, getting new stuff. So, how much does the Kanata matter? I don't know. Like, is Kanata even going to really get played when Standby Gura happens? Like, as much as I love to like go over the data with a fine tooth comb, unfortunately, this data set's probably only super relevant for like the next couple of months, if that, because there's new stuff coming out. Like that's going to specifically affect these sets. Like two of the three most popular sets in the meta are getting completely revamped with brand new cards.
Mm-hmm. We're in that shift between the old and new metas, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And Springfest is kind of like realistically, this Rumble is kind of like the midway point of that. We're like the beginning of the shift where Alice is in play.
Yeah.
But the other ones are just a few weeks away.
The next, in terms of representation, really is Tokyo Revengers, which did fine. Tokyo Revengers is one of those things where it's like either you have the answer or you don't. It didn't do great into Alice, which I think is a problem because I don't think it has a real answer to that. Like its answer is to like just never lose board to the Alice, but it's really easy for the SAO player to get the Alice down before the Pachin. If SAO gets to one first, which is going to do probably most of the time, and even if it doesn't, like Pachin is still trying to set up the dual laner's turn before it drops Pachin more often than not.
Yeah.
So like there's that whole turn of delay where Alice gets to come down and just like bully the board, push a whole bunch of damage, like combo off and just get a bunch of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like at that point, Alice has gotten a whole bunch of its plus, and even if you're able to get rid of the Alice, it's like, okay, well, it has the stock compression, it has, it has the hand size, and it had, perfect selectivity, so it's able to go get any specific thing that it wants. So it's just gonna kind of keep pushing damage, and I think Alice can do that.
Alice gets stop at 3, but I think the big important thing here is that it has the money counter at 2.
So next after that, really in terms of representation, and now we're starting to get into the stuff that had single digit rep. Slime didn't perform super well, and again, Slime is another one of those things. It's getting a new set, right? Like it's getting a new set. How much do you want to talk about? If the Shizu level 1 is still good or not? Like when a whole bunch of new stuff is coming, but the Shizu level 1 is still probably going to get played in a lot of that. So in any case, like it's hard to really talk about Slime because it's also getting a lot of new cards. But as the resident Slime player, what do you see out of that? Does anything catch your eye in that regard?
Nothing super amazing. Like realistically, Slime does what it does.
Fair enough.
And either it works or it doesn't. It also had to play into Argo significantly more, and Argo has the more explosive top end that kind of burns through its compression.
Yep, that's also true. That is
like,
also true.
It split with Silica and only had one matchup into the Kirito, so having just kind of that overwhelming majority of Argo is a pretty poor showing with the SAO matchup.
So that's actually something that I wanted to bring up that we didn't really talk about with the Sword Art splits. We talk about like Alice just did good. Alice did great generically. The top end splits are very interesting here because like they all did well, but the one that did the best in terms of pure win rate was the Kirito.
Yes.
It won 74% of them. That's a ton. That's insane. Like, and I'm going to be honest, I've not been impressed with the Kirito. I don't like the Kirito like at all. I don't think it's very good. So to see this, like coming into this tournament, I was like, I just don't think the Kirito is even worth talking about. To see all of a sudden, it's like, oh, that's its win rate?
Well, I mean, realistically, it has, because it's also with Alice too, right? Like Alice is a pretty big factor in that.
Sure.
Because Alice can also get you the tools you need in certain spots.
Mm-hmm.
The Kirito package has a couple different tools that can play around with too, so it makes it more versatile than some of the other ones. Like Silica is, hey, look, I can burn 2, shuffle back 2. So it's like, hey, look, I am Marine, but I'm more expensive.
Yeah, I do this very specific thing.
Argo is, hey, I'm super explosive, but you're never going to have the resources to actually do this. Whereas Kirito is like, no, no, you can do this all the time, and you can do some of these tools as well. So having just that kind of consistency with that, as well as kind of having the ability to respond to whatever deck you're playing into,
Yeah.
it allows you to really do matchup dependent things. And especially when you expect a lot of the board to be Alice, it
Mm-hmm.
actually is probably the best into itself.
Mm-hmm.
Especially with the pants being able to loop the choice for combo to keep slamming soul damage
Mm-hmm.
against your opponent.
Yeah.
Especially when that mid game, you kind of really take advantage of those pieces parts to really get those things in play.
Yeah.
You have the resonate to be able to get those to just consistently turn that stock you're generating into card advantage in hand.
Yeah. It did go 3-0 against Argo and 6-3 against Silica. So like it went 9-3 against other Alice, which is really impressive, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's really why Kirito did have such an impressive showing, is because it was really the answer to Alice by being Alice plus, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah.
So I'm not surprised by the results that we saw with at least one in top winning it all, but with multiples in the top 8.
So I think we've reached the point where, we could talk about, like, we could go into detail on some of the, the smaller stuff. Or we could talk about something that's far more interesting. At least I think it's more interesting. And that is, like, the rogue deck that is dangerous when piloted by the right person. Like, and I think, like, a prime example of that, like, the easiest example is the Hendrickson that YB piloted, right? There were 5 total Hendrickson decks. As a group, they went 13-13. YB kind of by himself won, like, most of those, if not all of them. Yeah, like, literally, I think he's the only person to win a game with Hendrickson. So, like, Hendrickson is dangerous when piloted by a really good player, maybe not so dangerous when piloted by some random person at your locals. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that that's significant. I think that, like, Saikano is another great example, right? Like, it went 6-8, but it had a top 8. Like, yeah, because Killua was on it, and Killua is a good player. Killua can make, not only can he take a deck that isn't very good and make it work, he also shows the ceiling that the deck does have. So it kind of proves 2 things. And if I may be so bold, Dragon Maid. It went 12-14 overall. 10 of those wins were me. Dragon Maid didn't have a great like weekend, but it can go top 4 at a major event when it's built a certain way and it's piloted well. Like, I played very well this weekend. I don't feel like it's, out of line for me to say that. Same with, Hololive Kanatamari. Like, it had a losing record technically, but it also had a top 8. So there's a lot of stuff. Don Machi is another good example. Like, we could go on. But there are some things that, like, just don't have that kind of ceiling. And I think that, you need to see the kind of consistency over multiple events. Like, if something has only ever topped once and then it never tops again, like a set, then that's probably an indication that that might have been more of a fluke than like a true ceiling. But like, if something is, consistently at, if it's getting trios tops, right? If it has multiple trios tops and then it, did pretty well in Rumble, like, you could start to get an idea that at the very least, like, even if the set isn't consistently dangerous every time you see it, it is at least potentially dangerous when piloted by someone who knows how to play it.
And that's one of the big things with these results, right? These results aren't hey, this means that this is always the case every time. These are results of, hey, no, this is what happened over this past kind of tournament scene, and during this tournament, these are what the results were. Does that mean that, say, 8 standby Quince is like an auto lose to Alice? No.
Yeah.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
But did it have a rough time during this tournament scene?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it did.
We're trying to find as many trends as we can to try to help us interpret, like, what is and isn't good, what does play well into other things, like how to plan for matchups. Like that's what this data is for. And let's be honest, this is, as much as we don't like to think it's a small sample size, it is a small sample size. Like, when one person played Grand Order Salvage Standby, like, do we have a really good bead on like what Salvage Standby is technically capable of? I mean, maybe. There are some things that we can infer from other data sets that we do have, and all this other stuff. But like, some of these, a lot of these sets actually have one or two representatives, and it's is it fair to judge all of 8 choice slime by its one participant? You know, so we got to be at least a little bit careful with that, and that's why it's easier to when you look at the Alice that had almost 50 decks, you get a lot better of a look at it, and so you get to see like what is it good into, what is it not. But you know,
And that's why we bring up. That's why I bring up the Alice into the Quince deck, because those were the two most represented
mhm.
sets. So we can kind of we typically will see more of those matchups because of that.
I think that there are kind of like two tiers of, like, not to make like a tier list or whatever, but like there are two like big sections of relevant decks, and that is the decks that are relevant inherently because they're just good decks, and the decks that can be relevant when piloted by a player that knows what they're doing. Well, that's finally it. Thank you for joining us for this way too long clock talk. I have no idea what's going to happen in the editing bay with this. We'll be back on Thursday with 5 cards, 5 minutes, question mark, I think. And then the following Tuesday, it will be another clock talk talking about New Jersey. Like, by the time you hear this, New Jersey will have been done, but we did not have an opportunity to record to talk about New Jersey. So we're going to talk about Jersey and the other tournaments between when we recorded this, which is right before I leave for New Jersey, basically. So like, we record this on Thursday into Friday before. So like, everything that happened from this point to when that show drops, we're talking about on the next show in a week and a half. And then after that, I believe another 5 cards, 5 minutes actually, and then we'll get back into our regular rotation. We'll have like a quit deck and all that stuff. So anyway, thank you for listening to this very long video that will hopefully be shorter by the time you actually hear it. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and have a good one.
We'll see you then.